Jesus went out as usual to the Mount of Olives, and his disciples followed him. On reaching the place, he said to them, "Pray that you will not fall into temptation." He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down, and prayed. "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." An angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he rose from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. "Why are you sleeping?" he asked them. "Get up and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation." While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, "No more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion, that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour, when darkness reigns." Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance, and when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, "Prophesy, who hit you?" And they said many other insulting things to him. At daybreak, the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led before them. "If you are the Messiah," they said, "tell us." Jesus answered, "If I tell you, you will not believe me. And if I asked you, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God." They all asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" He replied, "You say that I am." Then they said, "Why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips." Then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah, a king." So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But they insisted, "He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here." On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased, because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they had been enemies. Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. As you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him." But the whole crowd shouted, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us!" Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again. But they kept shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" For the third time he spoke to them. "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him punished and then release him." But with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will.
Well, good day and welcome, if you can believe it, to session 24. We left last time with Jesus basically and the disciples leaving the upper room in Luke's account, and we start today in chapter 22, verse 39, in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Gary, I got a question for you on this one.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
When I reread this, the one thing that struck me was what Jesus asked the disciples to pray for.
Mm.
And that's in verse 40. So he arrives at the Garden of Gethsemane because he's not been staying in the Jerusalem proper. He's been going across and staying most likely in Bethany, but somewhere outside the city. and he gets to this garden, which he's probably been at before, and he asks the disciples to pray. What does he read that in verse 40?
One thing, and that's pray that you may not enter into temptation.
Huh. So first of all, we've heard that before.
Hmm.
And second, he doesn't say, that basically temptation won't be there. He says don't enter into it. So this whole idea of temptation and what we've heard with temptation before, it's the Lord's Prayer.
Mm-hmm. And that'll continue in the story of him praying at the Mount of Olives. Luke doesn't mention the Garden of Gethsemane, by the way, which is a part of the Mount of Olives. He just says he's over there on the Mount of Olives.
Yep.
And he will pray himself. First of all, take this cup. Can you let this go away without? Can I accomplish my mission without going to the cross? Essentially, is what he's asking for, and that's interesting because one particular commentator really made me think, and I still think about it a lot. I've used it. I've quoted it a couple times now, and that was they pointed out that the original temptation was for Jesus to get all that stuff back in chapter 4 without going through the cross.
Yeah.
All he had to do was worship the devil, and he could have everything there, and he'd be taken care of, supposedly. And, the big promise. And so the deal, and so this was again that same temptation Jesus was feeling. He was tempted as well. Can we do this without me going through this? And he prays it that way. But then the Lord's Prayer comes back again, not my will, but yours.
Yeah.
And that's powerful right there, because that's still prayer. He's still in a conversation with God. That's all. You're talking to God. That's what prayer is about. And he says, not my will, but your will. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven through our lives.
Yeah.
And so, absolutely right to point out that that prayer that he teaches, pray like this, earlier in the gospel, comes powerfully through this one particular time.
It's like he knew it was going to happen.
You think?
And he was.
What's it like to know that this is going to happen and still have to go through it? Because it's one thing to have seen other people go through it, but to know it and to, it's wild.
Well, going in that same vein, like you say, when he's in verse 42, praying, if you can remove this cup from me, but not my will, your will be done. Knowing what's coming in full detail as he did, and as it's getting closer, that weight had to have been, I don't think we can even wrap our arms around it.
That's true. Well, it points out that Jesus knelt down to pray here, and Mark and Matthew talk about him going totally flat on the ground, face first on the ground. And the usual prayer posture, almost always for Jewish prayer, was to stand with open arms. And so, as one person put it, this wasn't prayer as usual. This wasn't a time as usual. This was an extraordinary time. And so he's there. Then verse 43 is interesting because 43 and 44 are missing in some manuscripts. But I thought one of the best talks about it being for real was, well, is it that unusual that that Luke would include angels visits. Well, the gospel starts with an angel visit with Zechariah at the temple in Jerusalem, and there's a Mary to follow, and an angel's visit, and then there's several kinds of visits like that through Luke and Acts, where they see heavenly visitors, whether it's like Transfiguration, and it's Moses and Elijah. They're going to see two heavenly visitors at the tomb shortly, and then it's going to go all through like the book of Acts, where there's all kinds of visits like that. So, including Paul gets a visit from the man himself. So it's not unusual, and wouldn't be unusual for Luke to have included that story of answer to Jesus' prayer right there, a confirmation that he was doing the right thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is one of those things. Those two verses are not in earlier manuscripts. They, scholars believe that they were inserted or could have been inserted. That's probably a better way to say it. We'll get that. I think here in a little bit. There's some more of that in this story, but with Luke, the supernatural.
I was just going to say real quick, just to help people, if you read that verse in a translation and it's in brackets, that's why. So we're just kind of giving you the hint. You might go, well, what's that in brackets?
Yeah, especially, I mean, if you're, and most of the folks know that, NASB is one that I've been using for years. Now I'm using the Legacy, which is just a different version of NASB. But that's the one thing that's beautiful about it. They put it in there, but they put it in brackets, where like an NIV or something like that, you could say rightfully so, takes it out to try to be, true to the manuscript. But yeah, not going there too much. But the one thing that Luke does that I think is very interesting, and I think it's a little bit of his style, is you really see the cosmic battle, the supernatural battle going on here, because it's not just the material world that is at play here. Satan has entered Judas, okay? And now we get this, this prayer with God, which, hey, let's face it, prayer is a supernatural event. I mean, we are praying in the physical world to the spiritual world. And so, but you get this cosmic battle going on that we're going to see more and more of, that Luke really pulls out. And it's, with Jesus, it's been like a magnet to the cross. It's and we're here. I mean, we are at the foot of it right now. Let me ask
this is and prayer, particularly, like you said, all through Luke's gospel has been one of his key themes, and I brought it up before. But whether it's public prayer, remember the gospel first scene opens up in temple worship, and it's now we're back in Jerusalem for one of the temple worship highlights, and that's the Passover. And Jesus goes over the Mount of Olives, as it says in verse 39, as was his custom. And what does he do? It's a time of prayer. And so not only is it maybe where they're camping out or where they're hanging out for this festival, but it's a place where he goes regularly to pray as well. So it's a powerful, that spiritual life is very important to Luke to emphasize all the way through: personal prayer, small group prayer, public worship, all highlighted by.
Well, I mean, not to get too crazy on this, but I find it interesting that we're in the garden. I find it interesting that it takes you back to almost Genesis 3, where in the fall, and this is the beginning of the restoration, because if Jesus is the new
Uh,
Adam. And basically, Judas is indwelt with Satan. We're in the garden at that point, and that prayer connection is basically what Adam and Eve were doing with God. They were talking in the garden with God. So there's a lot of real interesting things here.
and what are the other guys doing? They're sleeping.
They're sleeping.
It's like, hey, I get it. I fall asleep at the, at key times. You're either both exhausted or it's just a way to zone out, I guess.
I guess. Well, let's talk about that sleeping for a second, because
Mm.
reading through some of the commentaries, something that I never picked up before is in verse 45, and it's a word that only Luke uses in this account, and that is, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping from sorrow. They're sleeping from sorrow?
Mm.
When the
Mm.
Lord does that, what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, hey, I wish I knew.
That's good. All
But
right.
I mean, they obviously realize the gravity of what's about to take place. So maybe it's hitting them already, especially after the meal, and the way he conducted it and connected it to what's going on. And you may have a little more insight there too about the word, but
I have
just
no insight.
yeah. I mean, I could see maybe after the crucifixion, like but this is an interesting point at which for them to just like totally, you know, uh, kind of check out.
Well, I mean, again, we think of them sleeping from tiredness, from, hey, it's after the meal. Hey, they just walked up a mountain, or at least a hill, but they're sleeping from sorrow, and the word means sorrow. I mean,
Sorrow.
grief, sorrow, affliction. And used 16 times. You said I just did a quick word study.
Yeah.
16 times in the New Testament. And most of the times it's sorrow or sorrowful, but grief, pain, grudgingly. I got to figure that one
But
out.
see, they know. I guess at this point, if we think about what all transpired at the meal, there they know somebody's going to be a traitor. He's announced that. So a traitor for what? I mean, what's going to happen? And he has warned them 3 times before this, at least that we know of, that what's going to transpire. And he just said, "This is my body. This is my blood. Broken, poured out for you." I mean, it's something bad's going to happen.
Oh,
And yeah, then maybe it's all hitting right there.
it's a lot of weight.
Well,
And
remember, he sent a couple of them to prepare anyway, so they're probably the exhaustion probably is there, not sorrow necessarily. But this is supposed to be. This is like we talked about it last time. Our Thanksgiving meal. This is usually one of those things where it's a joyous occasion. Usually, you're looking forward to the meal and to the festivities and the family, and this turns into a total downer. It turns into a powerful and tragic situation. So, and they may have been feeling as they were right in the middle of it, particularly having seen his praying too. I mean, I don't know if they fell asleep before he was dropping, sweat like blood drops, so just pouring, or whether it was what's going on. But obviously something was up. And this is before the mob comes to arrest him.
right, well, and that's, let me put this screen up real quick of the map, because what is interesting, again, at least to me, is as soon as he's sitting there, imagine him sort of kicking him a little bit and telling him to wake up for the third time. while he's speaking, behold, a crowd comes. So just geography lesson is hopefully my mouse is working here, but
I see it.
upper room is in the quarters here. They probably came out the gate here and worked their way down the Kidron Valley, and then Garden of Gethsemane's here. Great. Well, now we've got a crowd coming, and that crowd is coming from the temple area. So they're probably coming out the Golden Gate, and somewhere in this area off the temple, and heading up. And boy, it doesn't look good, does it? I mean, Judas comes up to him and kisses him. Why does he kiss him?
They have made it a prearranged symbol. There is, even today, if you see somebody come say hi to President Netanyahu, is he president right now or not? I don't know. It keeps happening and not happening and not. But they still kiss cheek. There's still that hello custom in that culture, and he says, the one I do that to, and so he's just going to go straight to the Lord, and that's who I'm going to get. Interestingly enough, in Luke and Luke alone, it doesn't say he actually got there to the kiss. He went to kiss him.
Yeah.
And he was leaning in to kiss him, and Jesus says, "Well, you gonna betray me with a kiss?" So it's an interesting point there. But and you may have more insight into that too.
I don't know if I have any insight, but I mean, it's like you say, it doesn't take long for a hullabaloo to happen, and all of a sudden, the disciples who were asleep are now awake, and they're not just sitting there.
No, they got their swords pulled, and interestingly enough, again, only in Luke does Luke name the mob as being the same people that have been interviewing him earlier, and that's the chief priests and the temple guards, the officers, and the person whose ear gets sliced in this story at the arrest is the high priest's slave. So is the high priest there? We don't know. It doesn't mention that. The chief priests are mentioned, but his slave is there. And it's kind of like there's people carrying clubs and swords. Well, it sounds like with the chief priest slave there, they brought some muscle. It just wasn't these old guys who were, academics who probably wouldn't be doing the rough stuff. They brought the temple guard, the officers, the security officers for the temple, and they would have had. So one commentator mentioned they would have had the clubs, and the Roman guards, if there were Roman guards with them, would have had the swords. And who knows? It probably was a little mix of everybody, but they're ready for a fight, like they're getting an insurrectionist. And
yes, I mean,
and Jesus says, interesting, because back to the spiritual warfare, his last comment here is, you could have gotten me in the broad daylight in the temple, but this is the hour and the power of darkness for yours. And that's that. Not only is it the cover of darkness at night, but it's darkness of evil.
Well, before you jump to that line, you talked about it. Peter, which we don't know from this gospel, but we know from the other gospels, he's the one that struck his ear. All right. But Luke is the only one that says that he touched his ear and healed it. Whoa.
Wow. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being the guy that lost the ear and then had it put back and healed? It's Jesus' last healing.
Yeah. Well, and just think about that for a second. This is, like you say, this is the slave of the the high priest. Okay, so not a chief priest, not a Pharisee, not a scribe. This is a slave of the man himself, the high priest himself. What a testimony that is.
Yeah, you're there to arrest the guy, and he heals you.
Whoa. So yeah, and Luke is the only one that says that he was healed. That
he healed him. That's correct. So, and many, again, those who believe, and probably rightfully so, that Luke was a physician, as Paul points out, that this would be an interest he'd have specifically to mention.
Absolutely. And then, like you say, the supernatural part of Jesus's line, I think you cannot be underestimated. Which that is the power of darkness are yours. Whoa! This is your hour.
This is your hour, and actually, it makes me think about the opening of John's Gospel too, about the light and the darkness. Darkness cannot overcome it, or there's different translations of that word, but he's still that light in this situation, and shows it with healing the enemies. Man, there.
And again, this is like it feels like a replay of Genesis 3 with slightly different players. The darkness comes in to attack the light, and it's crazy. But so they bind him up, they arrest him, and they lead him away to the house of the high priest. And Peter's following at a distance. And let me put the map up again.
We're back down to the southern part of the city, or they call it the lower city.
Yes. So
down.
So most likely, you don't know what path they followed. If Gethsemane is here is the house of the high priest, which is very in the same quarters as the traditional location.
The upper room. Yeah. In fact, there just like almost every holy spot, there's two locations that are possible. There's that one there in that Essene quarter, and then just over to the east in the lower city area is another location that many maps have for the high priest's house. So, and there were two. Caiaphas and Ananias was kind of in the background. Caiaphas is Ananias's son-in-law, right. And so Ananias is still fairly well in power as a high priest, but Caiaphas, interestingly enough, had the longest run. He was tied for the longest run when all is said and done. But at his point, it was the longest run of a high priest at 18 years total, because a lot of them were just 1 year appointments and didn't even make it 1 year with the Herods and the Herod families, because they were appointing them. And Ananias and his sons were in there for a long time, and they were, I think, up to a 30-year plus reign in the high priesthood. So it could have been one of the two of their houses that are flipped. But anyway, they're down in that southern part of the city, and they got some traveling to do as this story develops. But this is at the house, so it's kind of undercover of. I'm sure the neighbors know what's going on, because there's this big, entourage of guards and people.
Oh, this would wake you up at night. Yeah. But he goes now in we're going to stick with Luke, because when you put all of this together, Jesus goes to Ananias, we find out in John. He goes to Caiaphas, we find out in John. Luke just says he's brought to the high priest house. Great. Let's stay with Luke. So he gets there, and really the story at the high priest house is not about Jesus in Luke's story. It's about Peter. And God bless Peter. I mean, he was big and bold and said, "I will, I'll die with you." And now he's sitting
And he
out.
pulls the sword, even though it's
Oh, and
not
he pulls the
him
sword.
and
That's
Luke.
right.
We find out,
Yeah,
the
yeah. Don't
identity.
discount that. Don't discount that at all. But but then he gets to, he's sitting there outside of the high priest's house, and there must have been little fires around, people staying warm, because we're in Passover, so the place is bustling with people.
Right, and it gets cool at night.
Yep. And he gets somebody coming up and says, "Hey, servant girl says, you're with him." No, don't know. And it just goes on. He finally, he ends up, cursing. I do not know this man. And boom, rooster crows. Jesus is. You could just see Jesus must be able to at least see or Peter, because he turns and looks at him. Oh,
Yeah,
talk.
that's Luke only again, that the Lord turned and looked at Peter.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, powerful.
Oh,
When those eyes meet and Peter realizes, and soul speaks to soul. I'm sure it just takes seconds to have that soul piercing kind of look through you, and it's more like, I told you. And he didn't have to say "I told you so," but that this was going to happen. And so again, The Rock. What would make The Rock? I mean, think about Dwayne Johnson or Rocky. Sylvester Stallone. Here's these guys like Peter, The Rock, Rocky, and what would make him weep? And not just weep, but again, Luke's adding a touch there. Weeps bitterly. I mean, he's just wailing uh, what the words seem to mean, and that's that outward when you're crying, and you just can't help but make lots of noise while you're crying because of the depth of the hurt and heartache that he
listen,
realizes.
you want to talk about? I mean, I think we know that Jesus will look at those believers and say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." And he will look at those people that did not know him and say, "Depart from me, I don't know you." I'll be honest with you. I think what Peter went through is worse than "I don't know you,"
Mm,
because when you have the Son of God look at you after you've denied him 3 times, and he
mm,
told you he would deny you, you would deny him 3 times. That's more, I think, uh,
mhm.
humbling. I don't even know if humbling. I mean, that's taking your soul out right there.
Humiliating, yeah,
Oh
or
yeah,
yeah, just no words in
no,
some ways, and that the way Peter did react, but he came back. I
he
mean,
came back.
he's still around and still in there
Oh yeah,
as the story goes.
yeah. Uh, but so we get that story of Peter, which is, to be honest with you, heartbreaking. I mean, just
Oh yeah, yeah. Because
um,
again, he
but
just
in this part of the story, he's blindfolded. Jesus is blindfolded, and they play the game of basically slapping him upside the head and saying, "Who,
who hit you? Yeah.
you watch about the cruelty." These are his own people, his own people doing that, and it's at night, and you know he hasn't been tried with anything, um, and now he's taken uh, before the Sanhedrin. So in our map here, if the high priest is down here in the seeing quarters, we're going
Which
to the
is
temple.
like an unofficial meeting,
Yeah,
but now we're moving into official kinds of capacities.
and so we go into the council, uh, and Jesus is now questioned before the council, and boy. They're going after him. He's not saying anything. All of a sudden, he says something. Now, it's interesting because Luke gives him, gives him one line. We get other lines that he said, but he basically says, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of power of God. And that was his answer. Ouch. Because these guys are asking him, are you the Christ? Are you the Son of God? And wow, I mean,
well, what does he say? At least the New American Standard 77 says the answer to that, are you the Son of God? And he says, yes, I am. I am has its own just powerful statement, because that's God's name. I am. So there's no punctuation. We don't hear inflection of words. He could have just said, yes, I am, or yes, I am. and really highlighted the Exodus 3 and on through the entire Hebrew scripture of that name that's usually shown as the Lord in all caps throughout the Old Testament. But yeah, and then John, of course, John's gospel highlights the I am statement. So this is one of Luke's.
Well, I know we can't answer this question, but how did they miss it? How did the Sanhedrin, who know the scriptures, the Torah, the Tanakh, the whole thing, how did they miss it when he basically gives them a prophetic line, all right, from the Psalms, and then says, when they ask him, are you the Son of God? And he says, yes, I am. How did they miss it?
Well, I believe it's their anger, and that it's already a prejudged situation. They're just looking for something to be blasphemy. They were looking for something they could charge him with, that blasphemy charge, and be done with him. It's a power play, and they've already kind of prejudged it. They're just looking for that one line. So they heard it. They didn't miss it. They missed the full power of it. They took it as indicting evidence rather than evidence that God's up to something.
Well, and again,
all along.
Yeah, you're hours away, and you like you say, you don't know if the high priest is there, but we know that in the garden, the chief priest was there, and it's the high priest's servant who was miraculously healed by the touch of this man. I mean, that's just a few hours ago, and now they're sitting there going, "Well, blasphemy." The guy just healed somebody,
Right. Right.
And
and they probably were saying, your ear wasn't really cut off. I'm sure it was just, he just touched you there, and blah, blah, blah. How you can downplay things and make the person, since they got hit and they were bleeding, that they were, feigning, or thought it was worse.
Just wipe the blood away. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's wild. But with the Sanhedrin meeting, you better believe the chief priest was there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
no doubt.
So they're basically, they can't kill him. Under Roman law, they can't condemn someone to death. They have to go to the Romans with him. So they take Jesus to Pilate, and again, we have the map up here. Most likely, he went to Herod's fortress, which is right here in the upper city. Which
would that have been a cross, a little. There's a thing that, if you notice, it's called Josephus's first north wall.
Yeah,
it's a red line running back and forth, and that was not just a wall, but it had on top of the wall, it was a bridge. And that went from the temple where the Sanhedrin was meeting, across directly over to Pilate's place, or where Herod's palace was, where Pilate would have been staying. So, and it was supposedly very secure. That was one of the highest security roads around for travel for Roman officials and Herod, particularly the Roman officials, because they'd be going off to the Antonia fortress up at the top here and there. That was where the troops were stationed.
Well, so they take him from the temple, like you say, across that. And I should get a picture. I should have had a picture of that bridge because I have that. This one doesn't do any justice to it whatsoever.
Right.
But they take him over to Pilate, and the thing that cracks me up is it's a sham, because the first thing they lead in with is he's misleading our nation and forbidding to pay taxes.
So that it has nothing to do with the blasphemy here. It's he didn't forbid him to pay taxes. It's a lie.
And then as a side note, and he says that he's also Christ as a king.
He's a king.
He's a king.
Which that'll get their attention.
And Pilate, he didn't care anything about the taxes. He says basically, "Are you the king of the Jews?" So it's interesting to me that they're leading with hey, he's forbidden our people from paying taxes. Pilate didn't care about that one bit. Didn't even faze him. But the king thing, are you the king of the Jews? Well, now that perked his interest a little bit. Talk about this little encounter with Pilate, because we get a snapshot. There's other parts of the story that we don't see, but we get a snapshot.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one thing about Luke's telling of this whole thing that is mentioned by those who spend their life studying this is Luke's very sparing. He is an editor here, and he's editing to very specific specifications. He's not telling full stories. He may add a detail here to just one-liners, though, like Jesus looked at him or he wept bitterly, but he doesn't expand on a lot of stuff. He's bringing the story tighter, essentially, and in this case, highlighting something that is going to be important for Luke's audience, and that is Pilate as the governor. Remember, Luke at the outset of the gospel is writing Theophilus, a governor, and so he's going to bring out things in the story that is going to highlight some things so that the Romans understand Pilate, one of their own, didn't see Jesus as a threat. He says, "Well, I find no guilt in this man." I mean, there's basically, it says no proof. There's no evidence that this guy's a king of the Jews. And so he seems very unfazed by it. Doesn't seem to think he's a threat or anything, because Jesus isn't some crazy guy saying, "Yeah, I'm the king of the Jews. What's it to you?" Or we're gonna take you down tonight, or anything like that. He's not like a revolutionary.
Well, and the idiom that Jesus answers Pilate with is as you say, is sort of like that's what they say. That's you said it.
In fact, you can take it two different ways. It's an interesting, ambiguous statement. It is, as you say, yeah, I am the king of the Jews, or it is, as that's what you're saying. It can be translated as so.
So it is definitely. It doesn't come across, I think, in English as it was there. You know what I mean? In the original language.
Well, and it's certainly either way. It's not. It's not, what would you call it? It's not in your face.
Yeah,
it's not an in your face.
Yeah, it's not a conceited thing. Well, Pilate, I love Pilate.
What's it to you?
I love Pilate because he is doing, and like you say, Luke is almost apologetic to the Romans. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. This wasn't a Roman act. That's the way. But Pilate's sitting there going, "Oh, you're a Galilean." Oh, okay.
I can move. This is a change of venue.
I can move this off. And so he's like, well, send him to Herod because Herod's in town, you know?
Right.
So,
Herod.
so
So Herod Antipas that's his area. He's the
yeah,
tetrarch, and the Galilean area is part of his geographic rule. So and he knows Herod's there because there he's staying in his dad's palace while Herod's probably somewhere over. You might notice there's a Herod Antipas palace right there. There's that one, which is called the Lower Palace, and then there's the Hasmonean Palace, which is in that same neighborhood, which was the previous before the Herods. The Hasmoneans were the ruling kind of priest king class, and they had a beautiful palace there that the Herods used regularly as well. And that it'll come into play later with Bernice and Herod Agrippa II in the Book of Acts. But anyway, that's part of what's going on there. So he just sends them a little ways down the road to Herod. And interestingly enough, I mean, Herod's reaction at first is, wow, I've been waiting to see this guy for so long. And it said earlier in the gospel, in chapter 9, he had been looking for an opportunity to talk to Jesus, and so he got his opportunity here.
now,
And this is only Luke. Only Luke tells this particular story.
what now? It's good to put out now. I don't recommend it as a theologically correct musical, but Jesus Christ Superstar, when this is one of those ones that the imagination, some could call it blasphemy, but the imagination of when Jesus meets Herod in this, Herod's like this sort of partying, crazy dude, and he wants to see a miracle. And Luke says it. He's been waiting so that he would see a sign, see some craziness, and he gets nothing from Jesus.
Nothing. Doesn't even answer him.
Doesn't even say
wow.
word.
Can you imagine?
Oh.
You have your time before the king of your area, and you do not use it at all. In fact, you use the power of the only thing you can control, and that's whether you answer. And Jesus does not answer.
So
Doesn't wow him with talk or with a sign.
So how infuriated would Herod have been?
Yeah, just blow your stack right there. How disrespectful of this Galilean peasant,
So it says Herod with his soldiers, after treating him with contempt and mocking him, dress him in a gorgeous robe and send him back to Pilate. And then
the gorgeous robe thing is a tell for a future event as well. There's a foreshadowing here because Herod Antipas himself will be dressed in this some gorgeous robe. The word gorgeous can literally be translated shining, and he's in the Book of Acts. He'll be dressed in a shining robe and die. When he sort of himself is taking in the adulation of the crowd, and they're saying he's like a god, and he doesn't stop them saying that. So it's
it's quite disgusting too.
Yeah, quite disgusting. The manner of death, very humbling, let's put it. And but yet this is that idea again of here's the person who is the Son of God, who's not saying a thing, and this other guy who's claiming to be God's gift to everybody, who's going to be made very humble. Both of them very humble, but one comes back.
Well, and it's
And where nobody knows who Herod, and if you went on the street and asked people who Herod Antipas was, they might think if they knew anything about the Gospels, they might say something. He's involved in the New Testament, but who knows who he is? And most people know about Jesus.
well, you end this little episode before we get back to Pilate with what seems like a throwaway line, piece of detail from Luke in verse 12, where he says, "Now Herod and Pilate became friends with one another that very day, for before then they had been enemies with each other." What's going on there? I mean, why we're in the middle of Jesus being just thrown all around. I mean, close, we're getting close to the end here, and we get a line that, oh, by the way, Herod and Pilate are now best of friends.
But we're getting a note. It's interesting. There's no other historical mention of these two being friends. And in fact, a lot of people didn't even believe Pilate was there at this time of Jesus' life. But then archaeology has disproved that once again and proved that Pilate was around at that time. And so, I mean, this is a historian's little drop there. Somebody knowing something that, and again, Herod and the Herod family and the Roman governors are going to have a continued relationship all the way through to the revolt in 66 through 70. Herods are going to take the Roman side. Herod Antipas's grandson Agrippa II is going to provide troops to fight alongside the Romans. And there are Jews he's Jewish, and there are Jews who support him because they think the people that are fighting for the Jews are more like the Jewish Taliban. They're just like off the wall radicals and doing crazy things, saying they're doing it in the name of God. So there's different sides, and here you get a little drop of something that's going on historically. And you may know more too. You may have something else you want to say about it, but
not really. It's just one of those things when you read it for what it is. It's like Luke is putting a piece of information in here that to someone reading it would be like, that's when that happened, and
yeah, think about like Pilate staying at the Herod's premier palace in Jerusalem, and they're only in Jerusalem for the festival. Yeah. They're usually over in Caesarea at the incredible city that, again, Herod the Great, Antipas's father, built. That's this harbor. And it's got this beachfront home. The palace that is on this little jetty out into the water, and it's just it's one of the premier places to live on the Mediterranean. And when Pilate or any one of the governors come, the Herods have to kind of move out and move into their other house, which. I'm sure there's a little enmity there, though they have to also do some, what would you say, obsequious, or they got to get in good with them. I'll put it that way. We use some good Latin, Anglo-Saxon words. They got to get in there with them and put up with it, and then do the best they can. Well, so this is just a little bit of that.
Nugget, yeah.
Enmity that some of the Romans that came were probably barbaric to him, and because he'd spent time in Rome, and he was a Roman citizen as well. Antipas was actually, and and Pilate was probably just a guy in the military that kind of rose up. And I'm saying that not out of disrespect for the military. I'm saying that in the way that the Romans kind of looked at each other as citizens. Or you might be a Roman citizen, but you had to earn it. In my case, I was born in, and Paul uses that one too later on.
Too, yeah, absolutely. So keeping with the story, we get back to Pilate, and so Pilate had tried to unload Jesus on Herod and didn't work, and Herod sends him back to Pilate, and Pilate summons the chief priests and the rulers, and basically he's like,
makes an announcement. Yeah, makes an announcement basically and says, "Not guilty. Sorry." And even Herod said, "Not guilty." So that's 3 right there. And so I'm just going to punish him, release him, which would have been a lashing, not as severe supposedly as the lashings that you get before crucifixion, but they'd just let him feel some pain and no, don't do this again, and let him go.
But what happens is,
and this is Luke only, by the way. This from 13 through 16,
right?
Is Luke only.
And what's interesting is verse 17 is another one of those verses that, if your Bible has it, it has quotations around it or parentheses around it because it was added. And you understand why it's added, because if you're reading Luke's gospel only, it doesn't make sense about them releasing Barabbas, so we get a riot here. We get basically mob rule. And again, geopolitical, what's going on at the time? He is in Jerusalem to basically keep the peace because of the festival, the Passover festival that's going on. And, so you get this tradition of releasing a prisoner. The weirdest thing in the world. It's just like, okay, to appease everybody, we're just going to release a prisoner. Forget that. It's weird, but you get this.
Well, isn't that going on in Los Angeles right now? Okay. Hasn't that been going on in Chicago and Detroit and or maybe I should say that. You'll have to edit this part out, right? But aren't they letting prisoners out there? Next section, right?
Next verse. Well, this is you want to. We're going to go from that to this is why I hate protests, because basically what you've got here is mob rule, and it's being incited by. It doesn't say it. At least I don't think it says it, but. It's being incited by the high priests and the priesthood, basically stirring up the crowd to say, crucify. Innocent man. The Romans and the quote, quote, king of the Jews, Herod, are saying he's innocent, but the religious leaders are so scared of him that they're inciting the crowd to say, crucify. Wow. This is what mob rule is all about right here.
And as the verse 23 ends, and their voices began to prevail.
Yeah.
They're so vocal and what would you say? Physically active about it, that they give in. And even though, again, they'll say, Pilate himself a third time will say, I find no guilt, demanding the death penalty, but he's going to let him have it.
And this is where Pilate, Pilate's been doing pretty good. Let's face it. He's been doing very good from the standpoint of, he's like, I find nothing wrong with them. I've tried to push this off on somebody else. He's found nothing wrong with him. I brought the people in, made an announcement to the world, I find nothing wrong with him. But here's the weakness of Pilate: is it's easier for him to basically do an injustice than it is to stand up to a riotous crowd. Boy, is there a lesson there for today. I mean, from our our political leaders, it's easier just to run on the polls instead of do what's morally correct. And Pilate fails miserably here because he just gives in because it's easier for him. It's easier for him to just kill an innocent man than it is to possibly have a riot on his hands. Wow. I mean, what? I don't even have words for it. I mean, it's a weak, small, tiny little man who gave into the crowd.
Well, they weren't known as necessarily Roman governors, I should say, weren't necessarily, maybe we should say politicians, because Pilate was a politician, but aren't known for their backbone. They're known for the polls, and the poll here was take care of him, eliminate him, and that's what they did. Oh man, that's
Well,
sad.
I mean, face it, he just wanted to stay in power, and he didn't want.
No matter what right or wrong,
yeah,
meant here, they just did what was.
So I mean, I guess might as well just go ahead and get us kicked off YouTube. It hasn't changed. It hasn't changed in 2,000 years.
Human nature hasn't changed. Yeah.
Human nature hasn't changed in 2,000 years.
Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, to quote a famous, I believe that was a British politician.
It was Winston Churchill.
Was it Winston Churchill? No, I thought it was Cromwell.
Somebody will correct us somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
But I mean, everybody, you want to sit there and say, oh, what we're experiencing today from a government corruption, that's just so new to us. No, it's been there for a very, very long time. And Pilate's, this is an example of, just weak-minded people that want to stay in power instead of doing what is morally right. The morally right people that stand up usually get canceled. Oh, there's another thing I might get in trouble for. So he delivers him up. He delivers him up to be crucified. And that's where the story ends today. And it's sobering because he sat there in front of the religious leaders at the time, the religious leaders that were put in place by God for these people to be. They were given the oracles, and they were given the job to be a kingdom of priests to bring all the nations back together again. And they had this story. They had Moses that said, a prophet shall come that's mightier than me. They had Genesis 3 that said, God said, I'm going to send somebody, that will reconcile all this. And they stood face to face with him and asked him the question. He says, yes, I am the Son of God. And they killed
him. Which was earlier when they were asking him I believe that's at the high priest's house. I'd have to look whether it's high priest's house or the Sanhedrin, but I believe it's the high priest's house. They ask him if he's Messiah, and he says, even if I told you I was, you wouldn't believe me.
That's
and
right.
And this is in that vein. He told them, yes, I'm the Son of God. They didn't believe him. That was the blasphemy charge, not the whoa, we better pay attention. And it's interesting because Luke will carry on this kind of story into the book of Acts with Rabbi Gamaliel, for instance. I have to mention, Gamaliel, one of my Bible heroes, but he says he's the only one with the guts in Scripture to stand up to tell this crew, the same group of people. Probably some personalities, names have changed to protect the guilty, but Gamaliel will say, if this is of God, we can't stop it.
Can't stop.
If it's not of God, it's just going to drop off, and we don't have to worry about it. But if it's from God, it's going to keep going strong. And guess whose word and which one of the Sanhedrin leaders was correct about it? So,
well, you talk about that, the Pharisee Nicodemus, and he's saying the same thing to Nicodemus. How can I tell you spiritual things when you won't even listen to me about earthly things? Or heavenly things. I'm misquoting that horribly, but you get the idea. It's like, I can tell you, but you're not going to believe me. Why aren't you going to believe me?
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to recognize that not everybody was on board for this. That this was a orchestrated. For a long time, orchestrated hit job, and not everybody agreed with it, and may have been vocal about it at the time, and were just overruled. And so, thank the Lord for the stories of people like Gamaliel or Joseph of Arimathea or Nicodemus, or as Luke goes on to tell that story in the book of Acts, where early on again there were several priests that had become Christians and believed that Jesus was Messiah. So it's one of those stories that if Luke hadn't provided some of this information, we wouldn't have known that as he continued the story in the book of Acts.
Well, that brings us to the end of this. We are now next week we'll go to the cross. We will pick it up with someone bearing Jesus's cross on the way to the
yeah, this is this is something you and I talked about a little bit before we turned the tape on, but these really are some of the hardest stories to cover. Some of it just because we've, as a pastor who's been preaching, and someone who's a teacher like yourself, we go over these in teaching and preaching venues year after year, and there's so much there. And yet it's so routine in some ways too that we can miss things. But also the emotional part. This time I'm really struck by just the sorrow. I may fall asleep in the middle of one of these in the next couple of sessions. Sorry, Chris, but just the sorrow is palpable. It's real, and these are hard chapters to cover.
Oh, well, this is the darkness. This is the valley of the shadow of death that we're walking through right now. And the thing that is hard for me, I think it's easy to sit here and say, well, we wouldn't have done that today. If Jesus came back and we were part of all this, we wouldn't have done that. And the thing that always worries me is like, we probably would have.
Yeah, you have to be humble enough to realize we're fallen as well, though redeemed. We're not perfect.
Yeah,
still sinner.
If you don't feel sorrow, if you don't feel humble, if you don't feel, quite honestly, misery, reading what's going on here and seeing basically the injustice that's going on here, then you probably need to read it again. You probably need to read it again, because this is terrible. This is horrible.
Yeah, and adding the possible or the probable knowledge that Jesus had of what he was facing. He had already told them what he was about to face, so he knew what was going to happen. And to actually choose to go through it is just a powerful story of knowing that what he was doing had a way more fantastic and powerful outcome than just what was happening right at that moment.
Well,
And that the sacrificial love of his to love us so much that he died for us. In his rescue of us, he loses his own life. Powerful, powerful story,
well, and the thing,
and more to come.
and more to come. But the last thing I'll say is, where we started today at the garden, when he is captured, bound, from that point on, he is alone, and that total isolation in the midst of this immense crowd is hard to, at least for me, to put my mind around it. He is alone. All of his disciples, all the people that he's been with, have, they've run, and he's alone on his own, and just that weight uh, of aloneness, of isolation within a crowd. Oh, it's
Yeah, particularly at this Thanksgiving celebration where pilgrimage is a part of it, and there's possibly 2 million people in Jerusalem, which has nowhere near that population normally. Uh, and he's got people from Galilee that have followed him that are there. He's got his 12 that are there, maybe the whole 70 crew, because they had been sent ahead to prepare for this trip to Judea. I mean, there's just hundreds of people there for him, and yet they're not able to be because he is in prison. And the deal about imprisoning in those days, one of those facts, but prison, you didn't put people in prison and leave them there for life in prison, or for decades, or even weeks sometimes. If you were in prison, if you were found guilty, that was it. You're going to serve the punishment. You're either going to get sold into slavery or you're going to die. And the prison was it was more like jail to us. And actually, they ought to use the term jail, because it was just a temporary holding place until they meted out whatever punishment or release that they needed to do. So you knew if you were a prisoner, something was going to happen. If you didn't get released, you were certainly going to be having something horrible happen to you. So.
Well, there we go. That should leave everybody happy. No, but but that's all right, because we know how it all ends, and we're going.
And we should have that
Yep.
heaviness, that weight in these sessions, because it's heavy stuff.
Yep.
We know the rest of the story, but you almost have to live through and feel the weight, to feel the weight lifted when the story works its way through.
All righty. Well, with that, let's end with prayer.
Yeah, this session starts with prayer in the garden and on the Mount of Olives, and we thank you, Lord, for Jesus setting us an example of going to you in prayer at all times, from the mountaintop experience of the Transfiguration to the little hilltop experience here at the Mount of Olives. There's some just highs and lows of life, and just being able to see you going, Jesus, to the Father at all those times, and praying like our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Amen. And we will see you next time. Take care.